Hi guys, James at Rampant Lion Reviews again for you today with another beer review. For this one we are going to stick to Sweden and we're going to have a look at a beer from another brewery that I've never tried anything from before. So this is a brewery that was recommended to me a while back actually, but I just never kind of got around to it. It was one of these kind of suggestions that just slipped through the cracks in fact. But then I saw that this beer was being released through one of the local Småskaliggs quite recently and I thought, right, I need to get around to actually doing something from this brewery because I heard that the beers were pretty damn good actually. So I have to say I'm very curious to see how this one turns out. Fingers crossed it lives up to the hype that people have told me about this brewery, and I hope that you guys enjoy my take on this one as well. I certainly like the name of this beer actually. So yeah, for this review then we are going to head to Umeå, which is in Norrland in the very north of Sweden, and we're having a look at my first beer from Beer Studio. So this particular beer is called Sputnik Krisis, or Sputnik Krisis I guess we could say. It comes in at 10% ABV, and this one is a Russian Imperial Stout. So yeah, I think this beer was released as part of the local Småskaligg assortment in April, potentially May, I can't quite remember, but I have had this one sitting in the fridge for a little while, and the main reason for that was that it took me a wee while to put together the notes on this brewery because it was just a bit difficult to piece together all the different articles and things like that. But yeah, nice to finally get around to reviewing this one for you here. I've heard that this beer is very good. I understand that this one was in production a couple of years ago. It was, it went out of production and this year they brought it back. So yeah, hopefully it lives up to the hype that I've heard about this brewery, and cute and very cool to finally introduce these guys to you here on the channel because they do get a lot of positive feedback in fact. But yeah, let's go for it then and see how we get on. As always with my reviews, I'll tell you a little bit about the brewery before we taste the beer. If you want to get straight to the tasting, just fast forward. All the usual links are in the video description below. That's the brewery website, the link to my other reviews that hopefully I can do in the future from Beer Studio. This is the very first time I'm trying one of their beers as I mentioned, but there's all the usual social media down there. If you want to see more reviews, do please consider subscribing to the channel. The whole channel of course has a geography based tagging system, so you can go into the homepage and search for beer based on country, city, state, county, province, prefecture, whatever it is you happen to be interested in. Do check out the playlist of beers from different countries. There is one there for all the Swedish beers that I've reviewed for you. That's constantly being added to, and as always, please do get in touch and let me know some of the other beers and breweries that you guys would like to see me review. It's always great to hear from you guys that are watching the videos, and the support that you show the channel is massively appreciated. So anyway, on to my brewery notes then to tell you a little bit about Beer Studio then. So Beer Studio, as I've mentioned to you already, are based in Umeå in Norrland, which is way up in the north of Sweden, and these guys also produce the pop art sodas as well, and I do need to try some of those. I've never really actively looked for them in fairness, but I will need to see if I can get a hold of some of them in Malmö or something like that. But the company was founded back in 2013, and the four men behind it these days are Oskar Brännström, John Isaksson, or should we say Jon Isaksson, not quite sure, but Brendan Oxford and also Darren Packman. So it's Darren Packman who is the original founder of the company. He's from England and he worked as an export manager for Shepherd Neame, which is one of the kind of bigger breweries in England actually. He worked for them for about over 10 years, and he also worked as a consultant for Brewdog's operations in the Nordic countries as well. He's been heavily involved in Swedish to English translation for various different businesses. He's worked as a journalist, and he also does a lot of consultancy work these days as well. But he also runs the Beer Sweden website, which was one of the first beer blogs in Sweden, and this was founded back in 2009, so he does have quite a pedigree actually. But Oskar Brännström is the CEO of the company, and he'd previously been a brewer at Naustra Brewery, and he also played the saxophone in a rock band apparently. John Isaksson studied as a brewer with Nynäshamns Ångbryggeri for a year and a half before joining Beer Studio, whereas Brendan Oxford is originally from Canada, and apparently he just walked in off the street one day back in 2015 and he's never left. He said that he wanted to brew with them, and he's been with them since, which is pretty cool. But the brewery itself is based in an old garage, and the first brew kit that they had was a 1500 litre kit that was bought from Sigtuna Brewhus. Over the years they've continued to grow their brewery capacity and produce new beers, and by 2019 they were producing around 90,000 litres litres of beer per year. I did see that they wanted to break the 100,000 litres per year barrier in 2020, but whether that was possible with the whole COVID-19 pandemic, I don't know. Potentially they did, but I am not 100% sure. So we'll stick with the 2019 figure in this one. But as of July 2021, when I'm filming this review for you, these guys have produced around 17 different kinds of beer according to Untappd, and there's various different styles in there. There was lagers, I think there was a couple of IPAs and stuff like that, and then there was this guy as well. But you can check out the different beers on the website, of course. But yeah, that's all I can really tell you about Beer Studio for the moment in this one. I had to piece together different pieces of information from different sources for this one. Usually I would use beernews.sa, but yeah, I think we did manage to get a fairly kind of succinct little history of the brewery there. So I hope that is suffice, and if we do find more later, of course we will update the notes for the next video, because I've heard their black IPA is supposed to be very good, so I'll definitely want to have a go at that one. But yeah, as I say, that's all I can tell you for the moment. If you want to learn more about the brewery, you can check out the brewery website. You can follow them on Facebook and Instagram to keep up to date with all the latest goings on, and you can check out the Rate Beer, Untappd and Beer Advocate pages to learn a little bit more about all the different beers that these guys have done. So yeah, let's crack on then and have a look at this beer itself. So as you can see, the artwork on this is absolutely beautiful. I think I'll be keeping a hold of this can, to be honest with you. But I'm not sure how much I've mentioned of it on the channel, but I'm a huge fan. I'm a big history nerd, if you like, and when I was at school, when we studied our hires in Scotland, our history teacher, he loved Russia and Germany, and so we did a lot of Russian and German history there. So I've always been interested in, you know, the Cold War and things like this, and, you know, the Russian revolutions and Germany between the wars and all of this. But, you know, the Cold War and the space race was always one thing for me. I studied chemistry and then astrophysics. But yeah, the history of the space race and things I always very much enjoyed. So when I saw a Russian Imperial Stout called Sputnik Krisis, of course I was going to go for it. But it says on the side here, Sputnik was the first artificial Earth satellite that triggered the space race between the Soviets and the US back in the 1950s. Our tribute to the Russian Imperial Stout style orbits around the dark matter of rich chocolate, coffee, raisins and molasses. This is a beer that demands space and time. It travels the void between the accepted and the unearthly. Prepare for liftoff. Yeah, quite nice. But yeah, 330ml can, as you can see. I think I paid 40 Swedish krona for this. I could be wrong, but I think 40, maybe 45. It seems like a reasonable price for a 330. It could, you know, to be fair, it could actually be more, but there's something in my head that tells me this one was a little bit cheaper, actually. I couldn't tell you. It probably is more than that, to be honest with you. You know, come to think of it, 45 Swedish kronor seems a little bit cheap for a big 10% Imperial Stout. So yeah, I can't remember what price this one was, to be honest with you, but I would guess, you know, it must have been about, maybe about 60 kroners would be reasonable for this one. So for those of you watching in different parts of the world, you know, that's about €6, £5.50 sterling, somewhere in the region of like $7 for the can. That's probably what you're going to pay for something like this, potentially a little bit more. But yeah, a big 10% Russian Imperial Stout, this one from Umeå in Norrland in the north of Sweden. Beautiful artwork, as we say, and you can see the Sputnik satellite just chilling there on the front. If I remember rightly, that was 1957 Sputnik flew. So yeah, interesting. And then of course you had Yuri Gagarin, and was the first man in space. After that was that 1963, and then you had Valentina Tereshkova was the first woman in space, I think about a year or two later. But yeah, let's get this guy out then and we'll get on with the tasting. A 10% Russian Imperial Stout, the Sputnik Krisis from Beer Studio in Umeå in Norrland in the north of Sweden. Let's get this guy out and we'll get on with the tasting. Very curious about this. So as I said to you at the start of the video, this beer apparently had been in production early on at the brewery, and then they took it away for a couple of years, and now this year in 2021 they brought it back. I'm not sure when the last time they produced it was, but yeah, should be quite interesting. Let me just line this up again for you so that my OCD is happy, and there we go. So you can see the head on this one has disappeared very quickly, but it poured with about a quarter finger of a frothy, I would say kind of medium tan head. There's one or two big bubbles sticking towards the side of the glass there, and a few little ones going up towards the bottom of the head, but I mean overall it looks pretty nice. So yeah, you can see the smaller bubbles just going up towards the surface there on this one. So I like how it goes about its business. But yeah, in terms of colour, it's exactly as you would expect. So we can safely describe this one as a big, dark, kind of ebony rosewood black, if you like. If you shine the light through it, it does have a wee bit of that kind of Coca-Cola, Pepsi Max coloured edge to it when the light comes through. But yeah, definitely a very dark ebony rosewood colour. So remember, the colour of your beer depends on, one, the type of malts that you use. This usually determines the magnitude of the colour. You can measure this with the EBC rating, of course. The length of your wort boil is also going to play a role. The longer you boil the wort, the more the sugars caramelise, and thus you get a darker colour of beer. But usually this is within a certain level, of course, because the magnitude of the colour is decided by the types of malts. Any barrel aging that you do and adjunct that you add into the beer will also play a role, but not so much in Imperial Stouts, and people don't really tend to do that with IPAs. It's more in the kind of Berliner Weisses and Goses and things, these big fruity, juicy sours, that those two factors play a role with the colour of the beer. I've only seen an adjunct change the colour of an Imperial Stout once, and that was Beets. That was a stout that was done by the wonderful Puaste from Tartu, over in Estonia. But yeah, this is a lovely looking Imperial Stout, this one. I've got a feeling just from the look of it, you can see how silky and smooth this thing is. I think this is going to be one of these ones that's just ridiculously, it's very smooth and just very, very silky actually. But yeah, certainly looks the part of an Imperial Stout. I don't think we can really say much more about the aroma of this one other than the fact that it's pretty damn hazy. But yeah, looks very, very nice, this one. So let's take a closer look at the aroma and just see how we go. Yeah, that smells pretty damn good actually. So what I'm going to say straight away about this one is that on the nose it doesn't smell like one of the more kind of robust and bitter Imperial Stouts that you're going to come across. It actually comes across as quite smooth and quite sort of silky. Again, I keep repeating that, but a Russian Imperial Stout, I would always expect a Russian Imperial Stout to be a little bit more kind of bitter and black malty, and for you to smell that in the aroma. We might well get that in the taste, right enough, but on first glance, this one, it actually smells a little bit more like a sweet stout. I'm getting a few, I'm getting quite a bit of the kind of treat. Sorry about the edit there, guys. GoPro being an arsehole again. I'm honestly getting fucking sick of this thing. So this camera will be getting replaced rather soon. But anyway, as I was saying, this beer, for a Russian Imperial Stout, the aroma comes across as being, remarkably sweet. So yeah, quite a few different things going on with this one. So as I said, there's a bit of a kind of chocolate brownie thing almost underneath it. You do get a lot of kind of treacle molasses in there, those highly caramelized brown sugars in this one. And of course, an Imperial Stout like this quite likely will have a boil time, a wort boil of 4 to 5 hours, and you can smell that in this beer just with the thickness of the brown sugars. But there's also a lovely bit of kind of red fruity character to it, but we'll come to that in a minute. But you can smell this one is going to be a thick, big, thick, sweet, kind of oily type thing, but it smells absolutely lovely. So yeah, on the malty side of things, so as I say, backbone of this beer seems to be a little bit like a kind of sort of dry, powdery, chocolatey sort of thing. You get, it's maybe around a sort of 60-70% cocoa, and it smells a little bit like, the Nesquik powders that you use to make chocolate milk, or oh boy, perhaps actually is a good measure with this one. Is a good reference for this one, I should say. But yeah, you certainly get a wee bit of a kind of chocolate brownie note to it. I get one or two little kind of woody, very slightly nutty elements out of it as well. Yeah, you can smell a bit of the brown sugar in this one. You can smell a bit of that kind of thicker treacle molasses sort of thing. It doesn't have so much of a brighter caramelly note to it. This beer, it is a big, thick treacle molasses sort of thing. Not too bright, not too sweet smelling, but you can certainly smell that big kind of brown sugary element to this beer for sure. When you sugar it up, as I say, you get a wee bit more of a kind of a fruit kind of sponge cakey type note out of this beer as well, that's for sure. But a wee bit of chocolate brownie as well. When you sugar it up, definitely a little bit more like a kind of fruit spongy type cake. And I really like that about this beer. And then in that point as well, in fairness, you do actually get a wee bit of sweet caramel into it. So when you let the beer settle down, that it comes across as more kind of treacly and molasses-like. So that's certainly interesting in this one. The malty backbone of this beer is really quite smooth rather than anything else. On the hoppy side of things, you don't get too much in the way of hop out of this beer. I mean, you can smell a wee bit of earthiness, of course. You get a bit of a slightly herbal note to it. There's a wee tiny touch of floral aromaticity, but I do get a little bit of grassiness out of it, and there's a tiny little bit of zest in this one. I would even wonder, does it have? because it doesn't list the ingredients on it right enough. I thought you had to do that in Sweden, so that's a little bit unusual. But yeah, this is one of these beers where you would smell it and you'd think, it reminds me a little bit of some of the sours, if you like, the hops. It's quite a few of these Berliner Weisses and Goses and things, a number of the breweries don't use hops in them, and the smoothness that you get out of this beer would potentially make me question that as well. But you do get a wee remnant, as I say. I think there's a wee bit of a slightly grassy, zesty note to this one, but that's quite minimal, as I say. But a wee bit of floral note in there as well, and then a smooth, earthy, kind of herbal sort of thing. But on the fruity side of the beer, as I said, there's certainly a wee bit of a sharper raisin to this one, definitely. Underneath that, you get some juicier plum, a bit of a kind of dried pruny character as well. I get some sultanas, like dried white green grapes in there as well, and I think there is a bit of, there is a bit of a kind of raisin, there is a bit of a kind of blackberry, black curranty sort of thing with this beer as well. So yeah, like I say, quite a sweet, oily smelling Russian Imperial Stout. It doesn't have so much of the kind of roasty toasty sort of thing that you would normally expect from the aroma. So definitely take a wee bit of time to ponder over the aroma of this one before you get stuck into it. But I think it's about time for us to have a taste of this beer. So yeah, this one is the Sputnik Krisis or Sputnik Krisis. I'm not sure exactly how we're supposed to say the name of this one. A 10% Russian Imperial Stout from Beer Studio in Umeå in Norrland in the very north of Sweden. Let's get stuck into this one. Nice to finally get around to reviewing this brewery. Slange, skål, cheers. Ooh. Yeah, that's nice. I mean, it certainly does, it does in the flavour. It has a wee bit more of that roasty, toasty bitterness to it. So yeah, 100% Russian Imperial Stout, this one. Absolutely. Not the most hoppy and bitter one that you're gonna come across right enough. I think the first impression of this beer is that a lot of the bitterness you get out of it comes from that roasty, well-fired, bread crusty backbone. So just be aware of that. With this beer, but this one is quite nice, and it's a lot less sweet, if you like, in the flavour than the aroma would give you the impression. So this is one of these beers that really differs a lot from the aroma, for sure. The flavour differs a lot from the aroma in this one. And it is also quite nice and silky in its mouthfeel, but we'll come to that later. So yeah, let's break down the flavour of this one for you then. This is a solidly done beer, this one, and it gets a thumbs up from me. Let's break down the flavour for you then. So straight away across the middle and the back third of your palate, you can feel that the backbone of this beer is like a slightly toasty, well-fired bread crust. On top of that, you get a sort of almost like rye bready type layer to this one, so you can feel there's a bit of a kind of rye bready, wholemeal, brown bready kind of thing in this, and I really like how that goes together. If we focus on the middle third of the palate in this one, at either end of that you get a slightly more prominent bread crust. You do get a wee bit of that more kind of prominent bread crusty element out of the beer, and I like that about this one. But underneath the front half of that middle third of your palate, you can feel there are one or two little woody notes in there. I would hesitate, I don't think nutty. I was picking up a bit of nuttiness in the aroma. I'd say there's a wee bit of woodiness under that, under the front half of that middle third of your palate. You can certainly feel that in there. But on top of the bready notes in this one, you can feel the chocolatey elements to the beer, and there's a bit of a spectrum with this. Remember, generally speaking, you pick up the more bitter flavours at the back of the palate and the sweeter ones towards the front. So on the chocolatey layer that you have in this beer, you can feel that at the back of that middle half of your palate, there's a slightly stronger, slightly higher cocoa chocolate there, maybe an 80-90% sort of thing, and it's quite a bitter chocolate there. But as you move further forward towards the front of that middle third of your palate, there's a bit of a spectrum there, not too much. It moves towards being like 70, maybe 60 at most. Cocoa, yeah, because you can feel really strong bitter chocolate at the back, and then it just mellows out a little bit as you go further forward, either to 70 or potentially 60% cocoa chocolate there, and I do like that about this one. I'm not getting so much of the kind of cakey vibe to this beer, at least on the middle third of your palate, as I was picking up in the aroma, that's for sure. But yeah, sitting on top of that chocolate layer though, you can feel the thick treacle molasses sort of thing. So it's almost like in that middle third of your palate, you've got a big circle there, and you can feel that caramelized, treacly molasses sort of thing just sitting in it. If you go to the dead centre of your palate, you can feel There is a bit of a kind of sweeter caramel there, but then as you move further out from it, you get the more, as you move further out from that very small circle in the middle of your palate, you can feel it gets a bit more kind of toasty and well fired, and then you get the big silky kind of treacle molasses type notes out of this one. And as you go further into the aftertaste with this beer as well, the roasty toasty bread crust really pushes its way up through the brown sugars as well, and that starts to dominate the further you go into the aftertaste with this beer. They were saying on the can a little bit of coffee in this. I mean, in fairness, yeah, I can get a wee bit of coffee out of it, but it's a very, in that case, it's a very, very bitter coffee, and it's actually quite aromatic in a sense. I've spoken about coffee beans as an adjunct on the channel before, and I love how I do love how coffee beans, because they're probably the most diverse adjunct that you can put into beer. They can be aromatic, they can be floral, they can be fruity and things like that. It depends where in the world they're grown, the altitude at which they're grown, and all of this kind of thing. So you can get a wee bit of coffee character out of this one. I don't know whether I can't really tell whether there's coffee beans in this one. I suspect there could well be a little bit of coffee bean in this beer. But the coffee notes that you get out of this come out between the back half of the middle third of your palate and into the back third of your tongue too. So let's focus on that area then. So the border region between middle third and back third of your palate, you can feel a little bit of a bready build up there. There's a stronger bread crust and a bit of a more kind of toasty, well fired sort of thing. Then you've got that kind of coffee bean in there as well, and the coffee bean has a bit of aromaticity to it, a good bit of earthiness if they are using that in there, of course. So for me, it's quite an aromatic and quite a kind of earthy coffee bean that you get there. But into the back, into the back third of your palate, you can feel that roasty, toasty backbone, a bit of a kind of more brown bready, wholemeal bready sort of things we say. Then on top of that, you've got all the kind of yeasty notes coming out of the beer, which I really do like. So you can feel that the flavour of this beer is a bit taller towards the the back of towards the back of the palate there. So you can feel that that the flavour is tall, and as you move, you can feel above those layers you've got that airy bready sort of thing, and it's quite like quite a strong brown, almost rye, grainy bread that you get within this yeasty note. But as you come further forward on this beer, you can feel the flavour condenses down a little bit, then it just squishes together as you go into that middle third of your palate. On the hoppy side of the things with this beer, then I don't think we really need to say too much more about the malty side of it, the malty and yeasty side. I think we've covered that. But the back corners of your palate, you can certainly feel a nice wee bit of earthiness in there. And as you move further forward, the earthiness mellows out a little bit. There's a tiny little bit of herbal quality there, but as you push towards the front corners of the palate, you certainly get a little bit of a floral aromaticity of this one. And the hops, I would say, the flavour of the hops is a lot more pungent than any hoppy aroma that you're getting out of the beer. But then round the front curve of the palate, the beer is distinctly lighter and grassy, and there is a wee touch of zestiness out of this one as well, which is quite interesting, but not too much. As I say, the zestiness is quite minimal, but you do get a wee bit of grassy character out of this one. I do like the way the green component of the hops comes together in this beer actually. So thumbs up to the beer studio for that with this one. It works, it really does. But let's focus on the fruity part of the beer then, and that front third of your palate. So again, border region between front third and middle third of your palate, you get a bit of a bready build up there again, a toasty, well-fired bread crust, some brown bready notes in there. But then the base of that front third of your palate, toasty bread crust underneath, then a bit more of a kind of brown bready character. Then on top of that, you get that nice oily bubble where the juicy, fruity esters just push their way out of the beer. So yeah, I like how that goes together in this beer for sure. But the fruity side of things for me is very, very nice. Towards the back of that front third of your palate, you get more of a kind of sharp raisiny note to it. Underneath that, and on that back half, on the back half of that front third of your palate, you do get a sort of cakey kind of thing to it. You certainly get a little bit of a sort of cakey, kind of chocolate brownie sort of spongy cake thing. It's somewhere in the middle of those two. But then underneath the raisins, you get a wee bit of plum and a bit of prune, and I actually get quite a bit of a sultana datey type thing out of this one. Those dried white green grapes or a dry datey kind of thing. So the fruity notes you get on that back half of the palate, the dried fruity characters, are quite interesting. But as you move towards the kind of front half of that front third of your palate, it gets a wee bit more sort of conventional and red fruity, if you like. So yeah, as you move further forward on this one, you do get a bit of a kind of juicier figgy note. Then it becomes more blackcurranty underneath towards the front of that towards the front of that, just the tip of your tongue, if you like, and on top of that you get a more sort of oily blackberry sort of thing, which lasts there the further you go into the aftertaste, and you do get quite a bit of juiciness off the front third of your palate in this one the further you go into the aftertaste. I'd be curious to know what hop they're using in this. There's a few candidates, of course. It could be English Bramling's Cross, it could be Summit or Eureka from the States. Northern Brewer from Germany, as they use in many Doppelbocks, would be a candidate as well. Actually, there's a good few interesting hops that it could be, or you could just use a bit of Columbus or Chinook and stuff like that. Will give you these kind of flavours with the darker malt base. Of course, hops behave differently with depending on what yeast and malt base and stuff you mix them with. So it's quite interesting in that sense for sure. But yeah, I think that rounds off our analysis of the flavour of this one. So let's take a quick look at the mouthfeel just to round off the review. So for me, the mouthfeel of this beer, it's kind of pushing towards the top end of mid-bodied. The carbonation is very smooth. It really has quite a silky and sort of slick mouthfeel to it, this beer. I really like that. It's certainly not the thickest of Imperial Stouts that you're going to come across, but remember, this is a more old-school Russian Imperial Stout rather than these big, thick pastry stout things that we're accustomed to these days. This is a proper old-school Imperial Stout, this one, so I like that about it. I do like that about this one. It's properly old school. In terms of the bitterness, and remember, IBU counts are my weakest point of beer reviewing, so take these with a pinch of salt. I think this beer might be, a sort of 70-ish at least. I think it's got to be about 70 IBUs, this one, and some of the bitterness is coming from the malt base and a good bit of it from the hoppy character as well. And I think I've got a feeling there might be just a wee hint of coffee bean in this, and that's obviously going to give you a bit of bitterness as well. But the malty base in this one, as we say, it's quite roasty and toasty. There's a bit of smoothness in there, and you do get a degree of sweetness out of it. But this, being a Russian Imperial Stout, is not the sweetest of beers. You can safely say that about it. The fruity side of the beer, though, is really interesting. You've got a very nice balance between the more kind of dried fruity elements, a slight sharpness to it because of the raisins as well, then the more oily, curranty and blackberry sort of things. So there's a really nice array of different things going on in this beer, but it is a properly old school Russian Imperial Stout. But at that, I would say it's one of the silkier ones that I've come across. But at the same time, with the mouthfeel of this beer, you do get that typical kind of Nordic cleanliness to it that I always talk about. We've had this with the Finnish, the Norwegian, the Swedish and the Danish and Icelandic Imperial Stouts. They always just feel really, really clean because of the quality of the water, at least in my opinion. I'm quite sensitive to that, being Scottish. We're convinced in Scotland that our tap water is the best in the world. It probably is one of the best, but whether it's the best or not, who knows, it's all relative. But yeah, this beer is really, really nice in terms of its mouthfeel. One of the silkier and sort of clean Russian Imperial Stouts that I've had in recent times. But yeah, I think we can leave it at that for this review. This has been a really interesting one. So yeah, this one is the Sputnik Krisis, or Sputnik Krisis, a 10% Russian Imperial Stout from Beer Studio in Umeå in the north of Sweden in Norrland. So yeah, really cool to finally getting around to this brewery. Let me know your own thoughts on this beer in the comment section below. Let me know what your favourite beers are from Beer Studio. We will no doubt return to these guys at some point in the near future, and I've certainly enjoyed this one. So have a look at this beer for yourself and just see what you think. I think it's a really, really interesting one. So yeah, thank you again for watching. Check out my social media, check out Beer Studio's social media, and I'll see you guys in the next review. Slàinte, skull, cheers, and catch you guys very, very soon.